Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. With these characters waiting a very long time to be back on the banner rotation, today we'll be discussing the upcoming characters and weapons on the first half of the 3.8 banners and whether or not they are a good pulling option for you.
If you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in, such as other videos in the To Pull or Not To Pull series, build guides, or even our series going over 4 stars.
Now, onto the video. The first character we're going to be looking at who has waited a very long time to come back for her rerun is Eula. Her team function and where she kind of fits into a team is what we're going to look at first, and then into her kit. Looking at her team function, she's going to be an on-field DPS, and specifically a physical DPS, even though she does have that cryo element. But Rift, what can you tell us about her kit, what she ascends into, her normal attacks, her skills, her bursts?
So, Eula ascends into crit damage, and as a physical DPS character, this is obviously going to be really helpful for her, and just make sure you go for crit rate when you're upgrading in your artifacts and whatnot. Her normal attack isn't really anything special in terms of the function, but this is very important to level anyways, just because she is a physical damage dealer, and most of that damage that's not coming from her big burst nuke will be through this talent. Eula's skill is called Ice Tide Vortex, and there are 2 versions of this. The press version does a single swirling action that deals cryo damage around her, and when Eula hits opponents with this press version, she will gain a Grimheart stack. You can have a max of 2 Grimheart stacks at once, and these can be gained every 0.3 seconds. The hold version of this skill does the same initial action as the press, but here she will consume all of her Grimheart stacks and deal an AoE cryo damage hit. The Grimheart stacks have certain effects for Eula, namely they will increase Eula's resistance to interruption and increase her defense. If her Grimheart stacks are consumed, the surrounding opponents will have their physical and cryo resistance decreased. Each Grimheart stack that is consumed will also be converted into an Ice World brand that deals cryo damage to nearby opponents. Looking at Eula's burst, this is called Glacial Illumination. It will deal 1 single swing that deals cryo damage right at the start, and then it will also create a Lightfall sword that follows Eula around for up to 7 seconds. While she's in this state, she'll gain a resistance to interruption when the Lightfall sword is following her. When Eula's normal attacks, charged attacks, plunging attacks, elemental skill, and her burst hits deal damage to enemies, each attack will charge the Lightfall sword with a stack, and each stack can be gained every 0.1 seconds. When the 7 seconds on her timer is up or Eula leaves the field, the Lightfall sword will explode and deal physical damage to all nearby opponents. This damage hit scales off of how many stacks are gained for the Lightfall sword. Looking at some similar character comparisons, Vixen, what can we see there?
Well, looking at similar characters, no one is really like her because of her physical focused kit. There are some characters that have been focused to look almost a little bit more deeper into physical, which is Razor and possibly even Xinyan, considering Xinyan has a lot of her kit to do with the physical defense buffing, and then as well as her own resistances to enemies, as well as her own buffs to physical herself. But at the end of the day, no one really kind of hits as hard as Eula, as well as considering she is that DPS hit. You know, a lot of the superconduct is going to help, but if we're going to really focus on what's going to be happening in the future, Eula really doesn't have a very good place right now, which is why I think they took about a year or so to really pull out Eula until now. Because there's no real place for her right now in the game, too much because a lot of enemies right now have shields, and considering that Eula has more physical damage, more than she has a lot of cryo application, getting rid of shields isn't going to be very good, as well as her teams in and of itself aren't going to be focused on reactions since she does that big physical hit. So at the end of the day, all of these things kind of culminating together kind of force her almost off the meta, even though she does multi-million number damage hits. It just kind of forces her to not be in the limelight right now, especially with Dendro and everything that has happened in the past versions. Beyond looking at Eula on that side of the banner, the other side of the banner we're going to be getting almost every summer now is Klee. And Rift, what can you tell us a little bit more about Klee?
Looking a little bit into Klee's kit, we see that she ascends into pyro damage bonus, as this will greatly benefit her as a catalyst user because of all of her attacks being pyro damage. Her normal attack doesn't have any special abilities or mentions other than the fact that you might want to keep in mind that Klee's normal attacks are pretty close to her despite being a ranged catalyst user. It's not as bad as someone like Baiju or Heizo, where they're more like melee catalyst users, but you cannot expect Klee to be hitting as far as someone like Yaimiko, Lisa, or Yanfei in that instance, where they can hit pretty far out. Looking at Klee's skill, it's called Jumpty Dumpty. She will throw out Jumpty Dumpty, and it bounces 3 times while dealing AoE pyro damage each time. On the third bounce, Jumpty Dumpty will split into 8 mines which explode upon contact with its opponents. Klee's burst is called Sparks and Splash. Basically, the way this works is she will summon her burst to attack nearby opponents, whether she's on or off field. So this is where Klee can kind of deter from being an on-field DPS to even being a sub-DPS from off-field, especially when you get into her constellations, which we'll talk about later in the video. Looking at some similar character comparisons, though, the question becomes more or less, how does Klee compare to other Pyro DPS, just because of how clunky Klee might feel. So Vixen, what can you tell me about that?
Well, we're going to be looking at kind of Diluc, Hu Tao, Yoimiya even, and Yanfei as well. A lot of the times these characters are going to be kind of your major Pyro DPS characters you're going to look at to really pull a team together. And considering how Klee kind of compares to them, Klee, as talked about before, she has a smaller model, so getting around quicker is a lot more difficult, as well as just in general, her entire kit is very clunky. She's a very slow character, and her normal attacks and everything aren't very big for constantly hitting, constantly far and being around the entire field very much. Whereas someone like Yanfei and Diluc, a lot of these other characters can hit very far, Yoimiya as well with their skill, and even Hu Tao, who's a single target hit, constantly using those charges, can just sprint around the field very easily. At this point in time, it really just puts Klee in a worse position, as well as considering she was a very beginning character and she's not an Archon. So the power creep and the scaling has become a little bit worse for her, and what I mean by that is that earlier characters in this game with power creep are not going to be as strong with their kits and have more sophisticated kits as someone new, kind of like maybe Alhaitham and Cyno. But beyond that, Klee is going to be a little bit more focused on a niche build where people are just going to get her just because they like her as a more of a character, which is what we would suggest maybe if you're going to go for her to go as instead of really going for anything else. But beyond looking at these two characters on the banners that we're going to be getting, we now look to the weapon banner, and first with Eula's weapon. So Rift, what can you tell us about Eula's weapon?
So Eula's weapon, Song of Broken Pines, has a main stat of 20.7% physical damage bonus at level 90. And we'll talk about the abilities on this weapon, assuming it's at Refinement 1. Basically, with this weapon, you will gain the Millennial Movement effect. This weapon will flat out increase your attack by 16%. It also states that when normal or charged attacks hit opponents, the character equipping this weapon will gain a Sigil of Whispers. This sigil can be gained once every 0.3 seconds, and possessing a max of 4 sigils will grant all nearby party members the Banner Him effect for 12 seconds. This effect increases normal attack speed by 12% and increases attack by 20%. Once getting the Banner Him effect, you will not gain sigils for 20 seconds. Some best characters we have in mind for this weapon are going to be Eula, of course, as it is her best in slot weapon, but also we can think of, again going back to Razor and Jinyan, since they do have some physical use in their kit as well. Razor, obviously, if you're using in superconduct teams, will take great use of this weapon for his physical hits. Jinyan, it just makes sense just because she has a lot of physical buffs in her kit, in her constellation specifically, but even so, it may not be the best option to go for just because she does scale on defense, so using other defense main stat weapons will probably be better for you in general, but just know that if you are wanting to go physical damage Jinyan, this weapon will obviously be the best option in Genshin Impact. Looking at the next weapon though, we're actually going to be looking at Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, and this one was kind of hard to decide because if we look at Klee's last rerun with Kazuha last summer, they ran Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds because Klee doesn't really have her own unique personal 5-star weapon that kind of goes with her like most 5-stars do, if not all of them. So we're kind of going off of the last banner. But Vixen, looking at Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, what can you tell me about its stats and abilities?
Well, its main stat has 33.1% crit rate at level 90, and then its abilities at Refinement 1 actually could help a little bit more with a lot of the problems that possibly come with Klee, or maybe other characters that you could put this on. First, you're going to be getting an increase to movement speed by 10%, which, like I said before, is a big help to Klee's movement problem. And also, when in battle, you gain an 8% elemental damage bonus every 4 seconds with a max of 4 stacks. This is going to be giving a 32% elemental damage bonus, which is why it's even better that it's a catalyst, so that it can help catalyst users even more. Looking at the best characters for this weapon, Klee is maybe higher up on the charts, but there are some other characters like Hazo, Lisa, and Wanderer. Now we're going to be taking a look into the video on our summary and how pulling is going to be affecting you, looking at the main question of the video, to pull or not to pull. But our first question is going to be, do you need either character on your account? Riff, what can you tell us about Eula or Klee being on someone's account?
Well, Eula, as we know, has a very high damage output, but she's not necessarily, too difficult to build. Just as a DPS, she has a crit damage ascension. It can be very straightforward to build her. Just go for damage stats, use a nice 4-star weapon if you're not going for her weapon. Something like the Battle Pass weapon's a good option. But all in all, we really suggest not pulling Eula unless you just really want her. Because like we've stated before, she just falls out of the meta pretty quickly, despite being a very high scaling damage unit, because she just can't work with reactions. And even though she is cryo, she doesn't put out a lot of it at all, so using her for a freeze team, it sounds good in theory, but it's not going to have the results you're looking for. And looking at Klee, she's funny and cute, the child terrorist that we all know and love, but also not a really great character we would recommend just because of how clunky she feels. She has a lot of weapons to use, but again, like her animations are very slow. She can just be very frustrating to play, and she teeters kind of on the edge of being a DPS and sub-DPS without fully committing to one or the other, especially at high investment. And if you're going for constellations, Klee just kind of really just becomes more of a sub-DPS. The next question we ask is, what elements is your account in need of? Vixen, what do you have to say about that?
As a Eula main myself, do not pull Eula for cryo. Me personally, I just pulled her because she looked cool a while ago when she first came out, but you would be so much better off waiting for someone like Ganyu, Ayaka, or possibly a new cryo DPS character in the future, maybe possibly Arlecchino and these other characters we're seeing that could possibly be there, because Eula is strictly a physical DPS. And while that can be fun, if you encounter shields, your supports are gonna have to do a lot of the heavy lifting to get those out of there so Eula can actually do the damage. You're not gonna want to use her burst to get rid of a shield. Believe me, it's not fun. Klee, on the other hand, can put out a lot of pyro, but she is not worth the primo gems if you have someone like Yanfei, Diluc, Hu Tao, or Yoimiya. Or if you don't even have them and you're looking to get them instead, they're probably better to use your primos on. The next question we're going to look at is, do you have the resources to properly invest into the character you pull, and what kind of teams are you trying to build? So Rift, how can you answer both of these questions for us?
So both Eula and Klee are from Mondstadt, which is where the game starts, so getting materials for them should be easy enough for all levels of Genshin players. And then looking at the teams you're trying to build, Eula is pretty niche and only fit for a physical team. Yes, there will be people putting her in other teams, but we'll just tell you now they're not going to work out very well. Klee can work in Vaporize or Melt teams with her constant pyro output, but with her sluggy kind of gameplay and how clunky she feels, we would say to tread carefully. And honestly, the best way to feel out these characters before pulling them is to use the trial event when they release to see how they play.
Looking at your account, next we're going to look at the question of what roles do you have filled or not filled. If you are looking for a physical DPS for a super conduct team, look no further than the queen of millions of physical damage number hits, Eula. She will be best for you. Don't go looking for Xinyan and Razor if you have the ability to try to get Eula. Klee usually fits the role of a DPS with her abilities and passives, but some like her as a sub-DPS off-field, especially when they get a lot of her C4 and C6, getting those high constellations.
So now, this is the part of the video where we're going to weigh the dangers from different perspectives of players, ranging from free-to-play all the way to whales and high spenders. So first off, looking at the perspective of a free-to-play player and kind of looking through that lens, free-to-play players should generally pull for characters that slot in a plethora of teams and make the game easier as a whole before the late game kind of kicks in. But neither of these characters fit this model. Eula is definitely fit for more advanced players for a niche team in physical hits. Not only can she be a little bit more difficult to play, but the team she plays in is extremely niche, and even within the niche isn't even good for the modern game Genshin Impact content. Klee can be used with a variety of teams, but she is not quick on her feet and can make an early game player to become really frustrated rather than getting used to the mechanics of the game, with characters that flow nice in battle and just overall feel much more fluid. Looking through the next lens or perspective we have, we're going to be looking at this through veteran spenders and even veteran free-to-play players. So Vixen, what do you have to say about these types of players, being one yourself?
Since you already have the ability to look into niche teams, a super conduct team might be on the list that you already have, like it was for me. And since Eula likes to come around to get her vengeance only once a year on the banners, pulling her now could be a guarantee to have a quote-unquote rare character on your account if you didn't get her last time. Believe me, she's probably not going to be coming around again anytime soon. With Klee's high unsatisfactory rate with the people that have pulled her, she should be one of the last players you are looking to pull, since characters like Hu Tao and Yoimiya exist as 5 stars to go after. Klee really just has had a lot of problems, and she is probably among one of the most regrettable characters that people have spent their primos on. Now Rift, what can you tell us about high spenders, and specifically looking now at constellations and how they're going to benefit them, and do they need to go after that C6 to fulfill that character, or can they sit something a little bit lower and save their primos for other constellations on other characters?
Yeah, so as a general rule, most good constellations other than the C6, of course, are going to be that C1 and C2 for a majority of characters in the game. Now, looking at Eula, she probably has some of the best constellations in the game and that focus all into her own damage. Other than her amazing 6th constellation, probably Eula's best constellation is her first one actually. This will increase physical damage when consuming Grimheart stacks, which makes for a bigger hit on her last burst hit. Looking a little bit more at Klee though, Klee constellations? Oh, alright, well, it's your money, not mine. So, as stated before, people like to put Klee as an off-field sub-DPS when you get her constellations. Her first constellation helps herself, while her second helps everyone, including herself. And this, by the way, probably is her best just because of the defense shredding you will get from this. But her 4th and 6th slot her nicely into an off-field helper. Her 2nd and 4th constellations are definitely the ones to go after if you do look to get her beyond no constellations.
Now the last question we're going to look at is, do you need the weapons? Both weapons are not necessary, so you don't have to worry about possibly throwing over 150, 180 wishes into this banner to try to get these weapons. There are many other weapons that both of these characters that we talked about can use instead of potentially using a lot of those primos to get these weapons. Lost Prayer to Sacred Winds and Song of Broken Pines have multiple other weapons that you can use and already have fighting for first place for these specific characters. Klee, Lost Prayer to Sacred Winds is nice if you had Back in Time, if you had Dota Cocktails even, or if you're looking to get something like a Widsith at a high refinement, that works probably even better. Song of Broken Pines is a great weapon, especially for Eula, but even on my own Eula, I don't even have her weapon just because I even used a 4-star Battle Pass weapon, Serpent Spine, and I use it as a higher refinement, and you don't even need to. The amount of crit rate you get as the main stat really helps you just focus on crit damage substats and make sure that you can kind of actually do more damage that way.
We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.